Okay. Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Tree Planters podcast. Margaret, Adam behind the camera, and Mary Lou. And today we're taking tree planters on the road. I guess maybe we'll do this more often. But we wanted to tell you about this special place in Aurelia. As you know, since we had Jeff Monet on our podcast a few episodes ago, we were really trying to talk about truth and reconciliation and what that means for our organization. So in spirit of truth and reconciliation, we are visiting this special place in Aurelia. And Mary Lou, kind of tell us where we are, please, today.
Well, you're at what is commonly known today as St. Paul's United Church in their non-sectarian, community gathering space. We are in what used to be a gym for children, and we are surrounded in the mezzanine by the Mariposa School of Music. And it is now a location that has been dedicated to truth and reconciliation and has been named in consultation with and agreement with the Rama First Nation to be named after their last traditional chief. And it's called the Ogi-Mami-Squake Gallery. And that means primary speaker, or Western world would call it chief. Red Earth Gallery. And Meskwake is where the word Muskoka comes from. So welcome to the Ogi-Mami-Squake Gallery, just recently named about 5 years ago, maybe a little less. And it is a collection of 10 years of work of 29 various artists, half of which are Indigenous and half of which are non-Indigenous, in a response to the call to action number 83 that was in the summary of the TRC report that Murray Sinclair released in 2015 up at Rama when he came to visit here to share with the community the facts that were established and the work that was done through consultation with, I think it was about 6,000 survivors of residential school. So it's all about the legacy of residential schools in Canada and the relationship that it has created between settler and Indigenous peoples of Canada. And the people who were interviewed in that process shared what they thought needed to be done in order to fix the relationship. And so Murray and the people on his team were smart enough and kind enough to come up with 94 different perfect plans or suggestions 94 different things that need to be done if we really are interested in correcting this relationship. So this is the call to action 83, that Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists come together to create art to inspire reconciliation, acts of truth and reconciliation in Canada together.
So there are multiple phases of this project. So Mary Lou is the curator of this. And so what we're going to do, and Adam's behind the camera there, is maybe we can talk about the first phase, and Adam will kind of be zooming in on the pictures, but maybe there's particular stories you want to share, or there's some highlights, or what the first phase involved, so that people that are watching along, the millions of followers, can really get the sense of how special this place is in this project. So why don't you walk us? So this is the first phase here.
Yes.
Walk over here.
We call each phase a round. And it was mainly because the process itself is a circular process. And so when we finished, after a year of the process, we had all gone around and revealed our images that told the greater story together. So it's sort of like an orchestra. Each one's an instrument, and once you get down, you sit and play together, you have a really incredible story. So this is round one, and it began in 2016. And then the next round was a couple of years later, and that was, it's round two, and then there's followed by round three a couple of years later, and then round four, and we have a community round that is called the fifth round. And as people come in to learn about the images and interact with the images and listen to what the images teach them or call to them. They then created a piece of pastel artwork, just as we responded to each other. They create a piece of artwork, and we sit down and work together then and look at those pieces of artwork and understand that fifth round particular to that group. So we have over 100 images of round 5 right now on the website, and it will be a continuous loop that we hope will never stop until the word reconciliation is obsolete and just a banking term.
Right. So for phase 1, can you tell us a little bit about how many artists you had? How did this process evolve?
Process evolved by putting out a call to the Indigenous community as well as to the non-Indigenous communities. I pretty much did the non-Indigenous community, and Jeff Menig, who supported the process, helped us find the Indigenous artists of the area. And all of us were people from Simcoe County. We have an abundance of Indigenous artists in this area. It's unbelievable. So the whole process started out after Murray did his presentation. I went to Jeff and presented him with tobacco, which is an accepted protocol amongst the First Nations people. It's like asking if they would accept this request, and if they do, that's like signing a contract. So I asked him if he would consider helping us in this process, and he said yes. So we invited two knowledge keepers from the Indigenous world, Elder Ernestine Baldwin from Nawash, unceded, and then Jeff Menig, a knowledge keeper from Beausoleil First Nation, male, female, to be our advisors and the spirit keepers for the Indigenous world philosophy. And then we had Dr. Austin Clarkson, a musicologist, world-renowned. I used to be the head of musicology at York University. He was the male knowledge keeper, and his partner, Beverly Bond, who was the president of the Jungian Society of Psychoanalysts in Ontario, she was the female component. So if we had questions or concerns or something was really disturbing us, we had somebody from one of those cultures, whoever we needed to chat with, to understand what was going on so that we would grow from the experience. So they were our 4 supervising elders or knowledge keepers. Whatever we did, it was always Indigenous and non-Indigenous, so that Murray asked us to elevate both cultures' worldviews to equal levels of respect and understanding. So that's what we've strived to do. So that the first round, when I approached people, I had really interesting responses, like, gee, I don't know anything about that, or truth and what? What is that about? Or some people would say, wow, it's too big. That's too big. I'm just one person. And some of the Indigenous knew a little bit about it. But it's interesting that that history is so traumatic that their children of today have really never been taught the facts, because no parent wants to pass on those stories of abuse. So even our Indigenous artists in Simcoe County oftentimes didn't really know a lot of the truth. So I said, well, I guess that qualifies us all to be Canadian, because none of us know a lot. So
Which is why
you win. That's right. So let's start. And actually, that indeed is what the first round, and when we look back on it, we see this. We did not see this as we went through it. We did not realize that the first round was going to be us vicariously for the community learning the truth. And that was eye-opening for everybody. Totally eye-opening. And it went from head to heart to spirit to body and came out in art. And it created a very safe place for us as artists from both cultures to come together and talk about tough things. to be able for us both worlds to say, I had no idea. Now I understand a little bit. So this one is actually about learning the truth, and I love it because we had two the night of the blood moon in 2016, in October, we began this round, and we went into a sweat lodge, and Paul Schilling was our sweat conductor, and so we went in, and it was the first time for many people to go into a sweat lodge, and we all asked the kind spirit, please grant us an image that will touch the hearts of all who experience it and inspire them to acts of personal and social acts of truth-finding and reconciliation. And so when we came out of the sweat, we feasted, as is their tradition, and then we sat down with two baskets of names, one basket of Indigenous and one of non-Indigenous. And as a curator, I had the privilege to be able to decide which culture is going to go first. And let me explain why I chose what I did. I chose that a non-Indigenous person would be the first because before we came, there was an incredible civilization here, and it was working beautifully and in harmony. Of course, there were some difficulties, but there was a well-defined, well-progressed, developed civilization here. When we came from afar, we introduced a huge change, and it's what Paul Schilling would call the Great Disturbance. Something changed. The balance of harmony and relationship to the land, to each other, trees, animals, waters, that was tipped out of balance. Anyway, so I thought, okay, let's introduce the settler population, those from away, into what is already here. And so we drew from the non-Indigenous basket first. And it was Xavier Fernandez who was chosen. And these are all these little things that we learn along the way. In the Indigenous world experience, the East is where the sun comes up in the morning, and that's where the light bulb of an idea begins. Oh! And who was the most Eastern person? But Xavier Fernandez, he was born in Pakistan. And he's here. And he knows absolutely nothing about the history. And so when his name was called, he said, oh, I'm glad I'm not the first one. My number's 11. I said, no, you are the first one. So each one of the artists was requested to read 4 basic bits of information. One, the TRC report. 2, a children's story by Eddie Benton Benet, an elder in the Dewa Society, that talks about the story of the Anishinaabe creation and worldview. It's a lovely introduction to a very different worldview. The third one was the Anishinaabe Almanac that told the 13 stories of the 13 moons. And the fourth one was UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that Canada has signed on to. And then for a bonus, there was a little booklet that Georgian College put out for their Indigenous education department, and it was called Indigenous Spirituality 101. And it's just little things like red, yellow, just basic observations, little artistic facts about it. This is what is most commonly seen in this tradition. So we all had something that we could understand, we could talk about. And so he did a wood carving or a wood cutting, which is an extremely difficult process. And he says, I chose to do that because when you carve into wood, you create light. So we were coming out of darkness. And so he expounded on the story that there was a time when the Creator looked down and said, the humans aren't doing very well down here. I think I should just start all over again. And the eagle went to the Creator and said, don't do that, please. Let me just look around and find somebody. I'm sure there is. It's sort of like Noah. So the Creator said, well, go and take a look. So the eagle flew around and sure enough found one Anishinaabe family who was still following the good road and their original teachings. So if you look really closely at his, he has, first of all, the feather from the eagle. And in that little white spot up in the corner, you'll see looks like a little cross. It's really an eagle who's coming at the break of day into the world of darkness that's been illuminated by 7 different campfires. And there's a white buffalo who's starving. So he pulled together the images that really meant something to him. But basically, it's coming out of ignorance. It's that moment of recognition and consciousness, the beginning of asking a question to find the answers for truth. And the truth that we're seeking is, we know that there are things that happen on this planet. We know that at one time we know that our ancestors, I'm going to speak from the settler now for a minute, the settler population was pushed away and for whatever reason had to leave their homeland, and they came here. And if we look around the world now, we would call that weaponization of migration. So it was one of those original forced migrations. We were forced to leave the land from which we came, which causes tremendous separation and trauma. With that tremendous separation and trauma, we are affected. We have all sorts of grief and sorrow and habits of survival that worked over there. But when we came here, there were already people here. And we're only learning now how it truly affected them. So in the first, we are now coming to learn our true historical events from the settlers that we projected onto those who were here already. And we are only learning now what we as a people, through our institutions, have done on our behalf at their expense. So every feather has 2 sides to it. And so he's looking to learn the truth from the other side now, as well as his own true history. The 7 campfires talk about the 7 prophecies of the Ojibwe people, and we are entering the 8th fire, which is a time that we must make a decision, and it will be one of 2 things. If we choose to go forward together in a good way, there will be harmony and well-being in the future. If we choose to continue, then there is no answer to what will happen, but it ain't going to be good. We really can't go on because the earth can't go on any longer with our interaction with her the way we are. So he clued into that. So he passed a moment of awakening on to an Indigenous woman named Marilyn George. And she comes from Serpent River, up by up on north of Superior, Cutler. And see, there's the feather. And there's an Indigenous family in this kind of lake bag standing on the grass. And we see a sun motif, which is really all of the directions, it is the origin of life, energy, north, south, east, and west, the sun. And we have this eagle, but it's really a teardrop. And she said, when I was a kid, I remember when the black cars used to come to the reservation, and they would start hunting out the kids. She said, I was the daughter of a trapper. We spent most of the time out on the land. She said, I was never taken. She said, but we all knew that we had to hide. Yeah, imagine that, eh? You're out there one day, and you go home, and your kids aren't there because they're going to be civilized. Sir John A. Macdonald, in an attempt to create Canada, or a nation on this land that was obviously not settled by Judeo-Christian Europeans, it was called terra nullius, which means the land on which no one lives, therefore no one owns it. And the doctrine of discovery meant finders keepers. If you find people, they're yours, just send the souls back to the Pope. Extract the resources, send it back to England. or France or Portugal or to the Dutch, or the Portuguese. So Turtle Island, in the experience of the people who lived here, was a live animal, a live place. And never had they encountered a people who came to kill off that living earth and create a monopoly. There was free trade here long before we ever invented the word. Anyway, there were trade wars too, but, that's part of being human. So she was one of the generations that they would come and take those kids because Sir John A. Macdonald and the RCMP, which was created to police the Indigenous population, they believed that the best way to keep these people alive is to turn them into Western people. And that meant that they had to remove those kids in the education process away from their families physically. Because if they stayed in their little village and learned English and whatever, they would go home at night and they wouldn't change. So it's explicitly written that it was to be able to take the Indian out of the child, actually to kill the Indian in the child. And that would be the answer to the Indian problem. And
it wasn't just, people think it wasn't just school, that it's just a school. Like there was a lot of labor that they had to do that was meant to kind of fill the coffers of the schools. There was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of violence. So I think sometimes people think, oh, it's a school that you stayed at, so much like a private school now. Where it wasn't like that at all. It had a very sanitized name for what actually was there. Slave labor, abuse, violence, mental and physical torture. Like it was not just a school, right?
It was a do or die situation. Some of those children, when they were brought to the residential school, never saw their families again for maybe 16 years. And then when they did come home, they were different people. So, yeah, imagine that. The pain and sorrow and the trauma of those kids. Even if their siblings were with them, they were always separated. They weren't able, of course, not to be able to speak their language. If they did manage to break away, they would either die fleeing or they would be picked up by the police, the RCMP, brought back. And the schools were financed per capita. And, it was, a long time ago when I was interested in the history of childhood, it really wasn't until Marie Montessori, Lord Baden-Powell, right in that generation, 1898, I think those were the years, that children in the Judeo-Christian tradition were considered, well, number one, they were considered property, and number two, they were considered full of the devil, and it had to be beaten out of them. So when you sent your child to that kind of a school there, that's what you learned to be. And even the wealthy people who sent their children to residential schools, those children were not considered the sacred gifts from the Creator that they were considered in the Indigenous population. Mm-hmm. So we'll see a piece of work over here.
Yeah, there's so much to go through. So
this one is done by Jenny Clark. And Jenny Clark is from an English background. And when she took this process on, she's a printmaker, and she did these two pieces in honor of the child. The top one, these are hung upside down. Oh, shucks. Okay. So the red one on the bottom is the first piece, and it's made on red Bible paper. And it is honoring the story of a little girl called Little Fatty Legs, long before the Orange Shirt Day was invented and begun with Phyllis, her story. There was a story about a little child who the Indigenous population wanted education. They wanted to understand the Western way because they always roll with technology and innovation. So they were ready to send their child to school and dress them all up to honor them. And so they took them up and they took them to the gates of the residential school, and they said goodbye to their parents. The purveyors of the school took the children in, and little Fatty Legs went with her beautiful, beautiful deerskin dress, her regalia, beautiful porcupine moccasins, gorgeous braided hair. And what did they do? But of course, they cut her hair off. They powdered her down with lice powder. They shaved her hair, and then they burnt all her recently handmade regalia that her family sent her off to look her finest. And so it killed off the child within the child. And so Jenny read that story and she said, who does that to a child? We did that to children. She said, this is to honor all of those children who suffered that indignity and who did not come home. And when they did come home, they were either dead or they were not healthy. And that illness and trauma has been passed down. The other one up on top is for every human being on this planet who, when they're children, at some point in time, life causes an insult to our psyche and a part of our childlike nature dies off. And I would call it our imagination and creativity. Usually right around 6th grade now, kids are pretty shy on imagination and creativity. You got to be a fairly tough, inbred artist to hang on to that stuff. Fortunately, we found a lot of them around here. But so that is to honor and to learn the truth and to change the storyline today, because our generation as settlers, truth and reconciliation for settlers is about fixing the relationship. We have to decolonize. We can no longer exploit this earth, and we are not superior to other human beings or life forms. And the indigenous part of it is to re-indigenize, to return to their teachings. They're here now picking up the bundles of their ceremonies and their teachings that had to be dropped along the side of the road like in a forced march so that they could survive to have the next generation. So this generation of human beings right now on this planet, in Canada in particular, it's our opportunity for us as settlers to decolonize, and for the indigenous is to indigenize. So our attempt is to do that. We discovered we were doing that, actually. And meet each other in respect, in peace, and in kinship, which is the original wampum belt, the original treaty of friendship. It's a friendship treaty. The numbered treaties came later, and those were land exchange documents. So it was a real estate transaction, and that's when life got ugly. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, to help people understand the process, because we've got the so much.
Okay, so
First, we get to next.
yep, non-Indigenous does a work in 14 days. He has a day to pass it off and sit with Marilyn. She looks at his work, they have a conversation, they get to know each other, they share their histories, and then she goes, whoa, I know what I'm going to do. I see that in yours, I'm going to do this. I'm going to respond to it. So he says, bye-bye, I'm taking my work home now, and now I have to write my artist statement, and I can't share it with anybody for a year. So she does her image. She's got 14 days. She passes it on to the next person who is non-Indigenous. We have a conversation, and then I give her her piece back. She writes up and puts it away. I do my piece, I finish it, I pass it on to an Indigenous. This is Paul Whittam. Paul Whittam is a young man who is what is referred to in his experience as an Indigenous child was he is a 60 scoop baby. And actually, in this painting, he painted his little son, Frankie, who was born in the very first round. That little boy was born. And Paul is struggling with, how do I, as a child who was stolen from my mother at birth, because she was Indigenous, therefore she wasn't qualified as a parent. So his question is, how do I teach my son about these histories in a way that it's going to be in a good way, and it's not going to be traumatizing.
Yeah.
So he passes his on then to John Ulrich. John Ulrich listens to his stories, and you can see the kind of, like, here's birch bark circles here, birch bark circles there. There's sun transition time, the water moving. There's the water over here. There's trees. Now we've got the palisades for the weirs from Minjickening. Paul Schilling's house has weirs for fences. His fence line looks like a weir. And so we had our ceremonies on his property or his lot for sweat lodges and feasts and stuff. So John is taking the energy from this and creating his impression and his response.
Okay.
On to an Indigenous, which is Rob Henry. Rob Henry is related to the person with the first Jingle Dance Dream as a medicine healing dance. And the hands that you see are his and his children. And he's still trying to get his children back that have been taken from him. And it's in a traditional hide stretch. Now, he did not see this maple hide stretch frame. So when that came up, that really blew me away, because very rarely will you see those framing structures. He passed his on to hers, and you can see the dance, the dress was wreathed. She passed hers on to Clayton King, who's from Beausoleil First Nation, and you see the female and the water and the same sun, 4 directions that was in the second artwork. You see the trees from the Muskoka areas. This is a Beausoleil Island scene, and it's the story of the birth of the mermaid and merman peoples. He passed his on to Peter Adams. This piece is made of Russian basswood. Peter is a landscape artist. He said, I don't think I can do anything about this topic. I only do landscapes. Anyway, he was out by Kamloops. And he was walking around in this area that had petroglyphs. He was in a park. And he was kicking the leaves aside, looking at the petroglyphs. And he was asking himself, I wonder what is buried in this earth that we don't understand yet. And he calls this cultural excavation. And he's marveling at how short the human memory is and how long the earth memory is. And for some reason, he painted a residential school class portrait buried. 7 years after he created this, they confirmed those children. I called him up that night when it was released on the news. I said, Peter, you tapped into something 7 years ago. Why did you put that residential school picture there? He said, I don't know. I was just wondering about cultures that were buried in the earth. Yeah, I still get goosebumps thinking about that.
Just to be explicit for the viewers, what you're saying is that this was done before.
7 years before.
Even though the Indigenous population knew
Yes.
their children were buried at residential schools.
Yes.
Died at residential schools. There was the fight at denial.
Yes.
7 years prior, he talks about buried children. And then it's confirmed that there are children buried at residential schools.
That's right. Yep, that's right. So he passes his off to Nancy King. And Nancy King talks about the works of Lee Merkel, an Indigenous writer from the area. And she talks about violence to the earth is violence against women. And she also beaded on the original little petroglyphs. And so when we had our first show here, people asked, well, what do those petroglyphs mean? And she said, I don't know. And you tell me you took my language. So that has a way of touching your heart. So she's in her regalia, and she is a traditional dancer. And there's another regalia. There's another regalia. So the female regalia keeps popping up, okay? She passed hers on to Christina Luck, who is one of the original Scottish families on Penetanguishene Road. She was going through her ancestors' journals and found one of her great aunts' journal. And so she did this piece that looks like a blackboard, which is kind of like a residential school. But in this book, she found the sinus cure. And it says, get the root of bloodroot, dry thoroughly in the sun, grate into a powder, sniff it up the nose. Will make you sneeze, but will cure sinus. Bloodroot has a small leaf, and the sap of the flower is the color of blood when dropped on your hand. So somewhere along the way, the only place in the world where bloodroot grows is the northeastern quadrant of Turtle Island. So her family came from Scotland. So, you know, everybody in Ontario has sinus problems at certain times of the year. Well, here we are. Someone's giving that person a medicinal cure for sinuses. And it's not her mother from Scotland.
Because they would know the bloodroot.
That's right. So, and then there's this green line here. And at this time, when she was doing this piece, she remembered her sister when she was 12. She had this dream that she was standing on the edge of the universe, and she saw all the universe and infinity and all the stars and infinite possibilities for her life. And she was filled with awe and wonder. And Nancy, when she was working on this, that was when the group suicide pact started up in Attawapiskat. And so she put this line down here and said, how can someone's child at the age of 12 stand on the edge of the universe, look out into the universe, and commit suicide? What have we done? So she started doing artwork, selling it, and then giving the proceeds to child mental health for Indigenous populations up north. And again, here's her piece from this regalia. She passes hers over to Mercedes Sandy. Mercedes Sandy is from Beausoleil First Nation. She was our youngest artist. And I forgot to tell people, when you do your work, please make it manageable so I can drag it around gallery to gallery. Never did I expect this. And so she rolls out her piece, and I said, oh my gosh, look how big that is. She said, it's a big issue. Okay, you're right. Make it as big as you like. So this is her story of basically the throwaway people. She says, you know, my generation is screaming for this to stop. How much louder do we have to scream? Our young men are killing themselves. Our women are being murdered. They're missing. You took our language. You took our teachings. You took our land. You made us invisible. You made us completely throwawayable. She said, we need to stop it now because my generation is not going to make it. Now, she was about 20 years old when she said that. Now, if you look up here, there's a JR initial on these bricks. The first residential school in Ontario was the Mush Hole down in Brantford. And they called it the Mush Hole because the kids only ate rotted mush. So when you hear somebody say, yeah, my family was in the Mush Hole, that's what that was. So her relative carved his initial in the stones in the bricks on the outside, and if you go down there and look at that place, you will see the children had inscribed their initials, and they had inscribed little sayings like help inside the building and on the bricks on the outside. Well, lo and behold, Jeff Menig, who was our knowledge keeper from the Beausoleil First Nation, he said, that's my uncle. That's my uncle. Yep. So I used to get phone calls from my uncle when he was out of that school. He went down to the streets of Toronto because he was so traumatized he couldn't survive. He lived on the streets. Every once in a while he'd call Jeff, and Jeff would go down and visit him and make sure he was okay. He finally went home for a while and then went back down to the streets. He was just full of ghosts. And finally, I think they managed to bring him home in his last days. So I think he, anyway, but he died terrorized by what he had experienced. And there he is, JR. So she passed hers on to Joanna McEwen, who is a renowned artist and art teacher in this Simcoe County area. And Joanna says, you know what? I looked at those bricks, and she said, I'm a person where the world is half full. I'm an optimist. She said, this is my painting where this is going to finally fall down. That wall is going to disappear. It's going to go back into the earth. They're going to dissolve. And look, there are strawberries down here. And the first, it was usually hung a little lower, and some little person said to me, "Look, there's all 3 different phases of the strawberry down here," and then Joanna said, "Yeah, I went to bed and it was all fine." She said, and then I got a dream and I sat up in the middle of the night and this voice said, "You need to put 2 crows in that painting." Okay. So she did. She got up, studied the anatomy of a crow, put them in there. She said, "I have no idea why they're there." So the little kids, when they were coming through the gallery one day, I said, what is this? They have strawberries. Okay, who plants strawberries? God. Okay, who helps God plant strawberries? Birds. Birds. All of creation is waiting for us to make this thing topple down, to return it to the earth. The birds are willing to plant the strawberries, which is the fruit of reconciliation. They are willing to poop the seeds. They are waiting. So this isn't something we're doing alone. All of creation is waiting because we have the power to take down all of creation if we don't. Human beings have the ability to destroy all of creation. So they're doing their job. They're feeding us. They're doing the best they can to carry seeds from afar to destroyed areas, just like Gaza, so that we can survive. She also was a lace maker. This is called Turgeon lace, and she's up from the Penetanguishene area. And she said, this is the stuff that the Queen used to wear. Yards and yards of it, ruffle, stuffer, and 3 Musketeers. She said, lace makers only were as wealthy as they were fast at creating lace. Well, she created this, and she put the medicine wheel colors in to honor the Métis population, the coming together of the English, the French, and the Indigenous in the Penetanguishene area. She got done doing the first one, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I got it backwards." So she, a couple days later, created another one. And to listen to this woman with a little pillow, with all of her little bobbins and all of the threads, all you can hear is, she was unbelievable. Turgeon lace. This is a piece that went to the next artist, and this is one entry. Yep.
Okay, and then these went
to her. Yep. And this person did a strawberry design, and over time there was a request on her part to remove the image from the gallery, and there was a time. It still happens that people would like very much to be Indigenous, and they're not. Or they can manage to get papers that say they are, but historically speaking, it's questionable. So as a curator, I had to sit down a couple of years after round 1, when it was brought to me by the Indigenous population that, you know what, this isn't what it seems. And so the conversation, the decision was that that person would remove her artwork. And if she wanted to return it, she would talk with the elder. So we're honoring that request. It was passed on then, that image of the strawberry was passed on to Jeanette Lucchese, who's a first-generation Italian. And when she learned the history of what happened in the Truth and Reconciliation Summary, she went crazy. She said, "I'm so angry. No one when I was in school. First-generation Italian. Nobody told us about this. I am so angry." She said, "I had a friend who lived up in Rama. I went up to visit once and said, how come these houses are all painted the same color?" And the answer was, well, because that's what the government gave us. You mean you don't have a choice? No, we get what the government gives us. So she was so disturbed by that. Whenever she would talk in public, I said, well, you know what? You got to express it, because guess what? A lot of people are going to be really angry when they find out the truth has been withheld, and that was an intentional withhold, because who wants to have to admit that the people that are representing us have intentions that are unkind? So this is her profile, and this is the essence of the Indigenous people. She said, you know what? See these images here? She said, these are people coming in and out of the dark, you know, more incredible energy. And this painting, Paul Schilling's painting, was over here in the original hanging. So this is continuing off right into Paul's picture, which is over here. She said, the resilience of the people of the earth is so powerful that they will definitely be going on no matter what happens. You'll see her evolve over time. It's really very interesting. And then here's Paul Schilling, the last one. And every public school in Simcoe County has a copy of this, plus his story, to set the tone for truth and reconciliation in Simcoe County and the public school board. So there was about 123. So Paul is from Rama, Minjikini, and he's one of 13 children. And he is a product of residential school parents and all sorts of other difficulties that his people and his family lived through. And he depicts the profile of a human being of all different races, creeds, genders, whatever you want. That's the essence of humanity. And look, there's that feather. It keeps propping up. Anyway, and so he tells this story about this. He says, truth and reconciliation. I accept your apology. Your apology made me cry from somewhere deep inside for my mother, my father, sister, brothers, and for my children. But I ask you this question. What possessed you to kill the child and the First Nations people? That's the same question that Jenny asked. To turn my people into an ugly stick. So wickedly, they hated themselves, picking up the broken pieces of their traditional ways. To do something so unkind as to be lost to yourself. And this is something we're hearing now in society talk about. I'd never heard anybody ever express it that way. To do something so unkind is to be lost yourself, to be broken and torn from your sacredness, which is yourself. There's a grandfather in the language, the word is mishomis, and his 7-year-old grandson. The grandson has a friend who is also the same age. Now, his friend is a Shoggonaut, which means light-skinned. Mishomis is teaching his grandson about life, and today he's going to tell him the teaching and the sacredness of the 4 colors. As Mishomis prepares himself, there's a disagreement between the 2 boys, and the grandson asks his friend to leave, come back tomorrow. His friend does not want to leave, but out of respect, he agrees and begins to walk away. At this moment, Mishomis calls to both boys to come back, sit by the fire. The Shoggonaut boy couldn't help himself, and he turned and he joined Mishomis and his friend. Mishomis, says the grandson, I asked my friend to leave, and now he came back. Would you explain to my friend that it's been 500 years since we lost our culture, and we're once again finding and rediscovering ourselves? Mishomis asked my friend to leave. Mishomis sits the boys in the circle. Grandson, it's a hard journey to unravel and to fix what is broken. Yet it's been 500 years since we lost our culture, and the way home can be painful. But let me tell you something about your friend. He too is lost, but he's been lost for 2,000 years. For someone so special as your friend, who can show this much love and respect for our culture, we can't push him away. Grandson, your friend must stay, and we must celebrate his spirit. So that set the tone for truth-finding.
So
the second round.
Well, just before we go on here, this is the problem, because we only have so much time.
Well,
So we're going to
do another episode.
This is what I'm
Yeah,
kind of thinking.
seriously.
Maybe we come back for phase 2 and 3, Adam. What do you think?
And 4.
4?
That'd be, you know what? That would be such a gift. That would be such a gift. And I'll see if I can snag a couple of artists. They're all working. They're all busy. I'm retired.
Well, I think what's important, I mean, just a quick question. If you had to say one thing that you learned from just phase one, something that will never leave you, that's now in your bones.
Okay. We are repeating an obsession, and our generation has to break that obsession. There is another way to live that does not involve dominion over. And it was here long before we ever showed up. And it's simple. It's simple. See this thing here? Just before you leave, I just want to show you this. This is one of our young female artists. See that bust of that woman crying? Okay. That was her first painting. Because out of that movie, Indian Horse, I think it was called, Wagami's story about when he was in residential school as a boy and how he was abused and anyway, she saw that movie and it really, really touched her soul. And the therapist in that movie said to that young man, your silence is killing you. Because he was keeping quiet the fact that he had been sexually abused his entire youth by a priest. So, right. Okay. Now, are you filming? Yeah. Okay. Go turn the lights out on the outside wall. There's 3 flicks on the just outside, right on your right, on the right side. Okay, outside, out right there on the wall, on the outside. Yep. We'll turn it back on in a minute. Okay, turn them all off. This is what this young woman did. She said, this is truth and reconciliation. This is her 4th round. So she's been with us for 2 rounds. She's about 28. She said, when I become the person that I was meant to be on this earth, and you become the person that you were born to be on this earth, and we are free and support each other to do that, and truth-seeking, so we can have our own personal sovereignty, we have to then choose. And here's what happens when we choose to learn the truth and to respect each other's sovereignty. And it's just that easy. Or you can choose to never turn it on. But once you do, at the fire of life, you become your authentic self. Or, as Paul Schilling would say, now that we know the truth, we have to make a decision. Do we kick the can down the road and do nothing and ignore it and make the future generation continue the obsession until it gets worse? Or do we have the guts, the courage, the humility, the wisdom, the love, the generosity, the values that the First Nations carry? The Judeo-Christian system teaches thou shalt not. The Indigenous teaching teaches thou shalt walk with love and the following attitudes. Doesn't tell you what is good, what you can or can't do. But these are the values and attitudes. There is no such thing as thou shalt not. We're big on thou shalt not, but we forgot what is thou shalt. So when there is a difference and a relationship is broken, we don't know how to mend it. Or we can choose to kick it down the road. Like Gaza. There it is. It's a conscious choice. And that's what Paul is challenging us. So what's my one takeaway? Every human being that is touched by this is an embodiment of hope. I am the hope of my ancestors. I'm here because of them. You're here because of your ancestors. All of their strengths, all of their gifts, their DNA, their mitochondria. Same with the Indigenous. Every human being, every plant life. Now, we have to make a choice. Are we going to be their hope that they struggled to come here to birth? And the very fact that we're here means yes, because this turns hope into an action, not just a philosophy. And reconciliation is about the act of going forward together in a good way, in peace and in harmony. That's my takeaway. We can't avoid it. Every choice I make today is a 150-year ripple for 7 generations. And we have forgotten that because we were abandoned by our homelands and it tore us apart.
Well, let me turn the light.
Okay, the light's coming on. Now it's pissed off. I got the lights off. Don't record that.
Breaking up the...
Isn't that beautiful?
It's beautiful. I mean, I met you at the Truth and Reconciliation Roundtable, the local initiative.
Yes.
I'm sure as our viewers will add it, and Shauna would say, when I heard you speak, the amount of passion that came through, I just said to you at the end, it's like, I could listen to you all day. But talk about this stuff. So I hope that, I mean, there is so much to go through, but one, I think Adam and I are going to commit to coming back and doing all of the phases.
Oh, that would be so marvelous.
We'll go through this again. We'll do phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4. And I think can you tell people about if they want to come see this themselves, how that happens?
Absolutely. The gallery is open every day of the week. You can call the front office for St. Paul's United Church. If you go to our website, the information is there. And the website is, all one word, call to, as in T-O, call to action 83, Simcoe County.ca. And you will see all of the images. You will see all the historical stories. And at the very end on our gratitude page, you'll also see how you can contact the church, or you can Google them, St. Paul's United Community Center, St. Paul's United Church, Aurelia, and call and talk to Katrina and say, I'd love to be able to come through. And if you would like to have a docent, someone to meet you, I'm more than happy to do that. And if you just want to stop by, bring your cell phone so that you can look at the image and pick up the stuff that's on the cell phone until we get our QR codes and other things ready so that people can self-guide their tour. We do coursework for high school students who are taking Indigenous Studies courses. We're hoping to be able to do some professional development for educators. Any group, we're open. For every 6 people that want to get together, we'll sit down and do a settler workshop to help settlers come into the present, deal with the truth of the facts, process it in a good way, and imagine a good way forward, and decide what they can do. We're looking to do some workshops on choose a call to action, how to do that. We can do just about anything with this, and just give us a call.
That's great. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm leaving. I struggled a little bit. Thank goodness the camera wasn't on me the whole time because I was tearing up quite a bit.
I know.
You have that power instead of...
Oh, that's that kind spirit thing. Nobody walks out of this place without feeling something. Yeah.
So we'll leave you for now, but it's a for now because we're going to come back and do all the other phases and we'll be in coordination. So if you haven't had a chance to come see it, please. This is one of those things that in Simcoe County we think we don't have culture, we don't have things to do. There's this whole thing about, you have to go to the city to get culture, but there's so much richness here that take advantage of it. So thank you, Mary Lou.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.
In the background, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday at 11, Adam? Sure. Maybe. We'll see you soon. Just keep posted.
Oh.